This was more than a week ago, right? We've been talking about doing this episode, but it does involve watching the despicable excuse for a human being that is Norman Finkelstein with the, I don't know, I even know what to call Russell Brand. So yeah, we needed to give ourselves time, do it in chunks. I've said about the previous time we did a show about Norman Finkelstein, I wasn't happy with my performance. I thought I didn't actually do enough research because when I tried, he's so disgusting in every way. Just listening to him made my blood boil. This time I've watched almost the entire. I think I missed the last 10 minutes or so when he talked about anti-Semitism. That was enough for me. But yeah, I think I watched enough to be able to discuss this and just the right amount for anybody who wants to say you didn't do your research to be able to do that because we take care of our audience, and yeah, trolls included. So yeah, I do want to say maybe I should no, I'll say it now. So yeah, when we had this title, Norman Finkelstein and Russell Brand on why you should hate the Jews. First of all, they never say explicitly you should hate the Jews. Norman Finkelstein is a Jew, as he keeps reminding us. He's a son of Holocaust survivors, as he also keeps reminding us. Uh, and yet, even naming that title, which I thought was easy to do, I did that before they actually got to the part where they talk about anti-Semitism, which is maybe the worst part of the whole thing. We'll get to that. I will get to my co-hosts today. Hey, Marco, Richard, Morgan, how's everybody doing?
Good, good.
Not
Yeah.
too bad.
Morgan, let's start with you. Your impressions of this episode, as we've been trying to do it, and I'm the one who said, "Hang on, let's wait. Let's give people more time than they need to prepare for this episode."
Yeah, so uh, I guess you introduced the two players in the podcast, but just I guess for anyone who doesn't know them too well, Russell Brand is a British celebrity and has been a celebrity, I want to say, for about 20 years, but forayed into politics about 10 years ago, where he started his YouTube channel. He had this channel called The Truths, which was where he would look at the news and tell you the truth about it from a very lefty kind of perspective. Um, and it was sort of very typical lefty fare for quite a while. He encouraged basically people not to vote. Until then, he did an interview with Ed Miliband in which he discovered actually he would quite like them to vote for Ed Miliband. But then sometime in the last sort of 5 years, he's sort of co-opted a very conspiratorial kind of tone, has had some influence from Jordan Peterson a little bit, spoken a lot about family values and this kind of stuff. And then Norman Finkelstein is an academic historically. I don't believe he's held an academic post since I think 2008, I think. But he was primarily known for his book, The Holocaust Industry, published in 2000, which is a book that was alleging that Israel and Jews make gain from the way they talk about the Holocaust. They essentially kind of use it cynically to further their own agenda, whether it's Israel's justification as a state. There's some suggestion of wanting to use it for financial gain, which is always rather charming when you're talking about Jews in a rather conspiratorial tone. And that was a book that was quite roundly panned. There were some people who supported it, not the most charming people, but some people it got a lot of criticism. And basically, the tenor of the discussion is the typical kind of stuff that you get from Norman Finkelstein. It's a continual, I think, slander of Israel, alleging that Israel is committing genocide, of course, a rather weighted term, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, alleging that Israel is engaging in apartheid against Arabs, but particularly against Palestinians. And so these are the kind of claims that he's making, which I guess we'll end up talking a lot about. But these are the people we're dealing with, and these are the kind of allegations that they're throwing against Israel. So that would be my way of introducing.
Yeah, yeah, and him using the Holocaust, saying that Israel uses the Holocaust cynically, of course. Seriously, the guy can barely complete a whole sentence without reminding us that he is the son of Holocaust survivors. Marco, Richard.
Yes. To be honest, the first time I actually watch videos of his interviews, I usually I have read stuff about his stuff that he's allegedly said, and I always assumed it was a bit perhaps misreported, or people were being a bit heavy-handed with him. But bloody hell! I mean, I was quite shocked. First of all, because this is supposed to be the intellectual that is setting the agenda on this anti-Semitism business, and I found him absolutely laughable. The kind of rhetoric tricks he used, like as you mentioned, he starts everything just making the point that he's the son of Holocaust survivor, therefore setting himself as on the side of the victims here. He's the guy, he's setting the emotional background for him then to make his very shallow and sometimes really dishonest points. He tends to use lots of, he tends to be very selective in what he says. For example, when he gives the history of the conflict, he started from 1948 when Israel was formed. And then he starts calling the people around the area indigenous population. Well, if I use the same trick and I set the conflict back in 2020 years ago, that actually was Syria-Palestina. So all these Arabs, bear in mind that Islam came in the 1600s, sorry, in the 600s, in the fifth century. All these guys are actually occupying Italian territory. So get off, occupiers. I mean, if you start going down the route he goes down, trying to make an intellectual point, well, you could argue any old stuff. And the depressing thing is that the people who follow him don't realize they have a serious cognitive problem that they should address.
One of the things you most notice when you see an interview with Dr. Finkelstein, and almost turns my stomach to use the term Dr. Finkelstein each time, because he relies on that doctor for kudos and clout that it feels like he ought to be stripped of, to be honest. But one of the things that you notice about him, as opposed to just reading the text of what he said, is how his intense, angry, strained delivery, the fact that he tries to bludgeon the listener, he almost there's a certain great deal of passive-aggressive delivery to it, and he's not somebody that you can easily interrupt. And that's what you see regardless of who the interviewer is. The interviewer tends to be incapable, even if they disagree strongly, and often they just let him ride out with his selective historical details and his cherry picking of certain elements of history to make his point. And of course, on the other side of it, not only do you have people who can't easily interrupt him, but you have people who don't want to easily interrupt him, because many don't want to question the side of the argument that he is presenting, because he is a useful idiot for them. And then when he meets Russell Brand, essentially you've got the two characters coming together: the persecuted academic on the one hand, and the ostracized interviewer, actor, former presenter on the other side, both coming in from a sort of victim mentality, as united in their victimhood, in order to present their version of the truth that you're not going to hear from the mainstream. And that's like a doubling down of bad results of evil to produce even more evil.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Thank you, Iron Meerkat, for the super chat. Iron Meerkat says, just treat Norman Finkelshit like any other anti-Semite. Ignore who his dad is entirely. Gaza de Lenda Est. Thank you for the comment at the end. And about ignoring his dad, who his dad is entirely. I get your point, but did you know his dad is a Holocaust survivor? I don't know if that has been mentioned. So, yeah, let's get into some of the stuff. The only way I could really get myself through it is to make notes and, piss myself off even more than he was doing on his own. So at the beginning, there's this point where he asks Russell Brand to read these testimonials by soldiers after Operation. I don't remember what the name of it was. I usually forget those names, but I think it was the one in 2014. And there were testimonials about destruction, and he read a bunch of them, and all of them are about destruction. We destroyed it. It's crazy, it's insane, and so on, how we destroyed it. And of course, he uses this as part of his claim that Israel is intentionally targeting civilians. Now, you can see right there how his method is, because he knows full well this is not an ignorant human being. He knows that destruction is destruction of empty buildings. Almost every single time, it is destruction of buildings where Hamas was operating or Hamas could operate, and they destroy the buildings. He knows that Israel goes out of its way to protect civilians, a policy which, viewers of this channel know I very strongly oppose, but that is Israel's policy. And yet he starts lying from the start. He has Russell Brand read lives from his book. I don't think Russell Brand has a particular moral issue with lying. Normally he seems to just make stuff up as he goes along. But yeah, that also counts as lying. So yeah, and one other point before I go to Morgan is he said something about what he calls high-tech massacres. Now again, the technology used by Israel, unfortunately, is used for the most part to avoid civilian casualties, to find out where terrorists are hiding, find out where there might be where they might be shooting from, find out where the tunnels are. If you've seen these videos of Israel exploding tunnels in recent weeks, they again go out of their way to make sure nobody actually dies. It's just the infrastructure that won't be there. And destroying this infrastructure, I saw Owen Jones tweet one of those videos and call it a part of Israel's genocide. It's genocide against a tunnel. So yeah, these people's relationship with the truth is one that we should pay close attention to. They use facts and then add lies and produce what they produce as they have in this hour plus 70 something minute video. Morgan.
Can you hear me now? My connection dropped for a moment there. Sorry, I don't know where I got to with my introduction before you stopped hearing me. But yeah, so I think a lot of what he says, part of what's so terrible about Finkelstein in this interview, and actually in a few of the other ones he's done, he did a debate with Alan Dershowitz as well on Piers Morgan's show, is I think to most people, he will probably come across as a kind of reasoned, softly spoken kind of guy who's presenting the kind of reasonable case for the Palestinian point of view. And I think basically what lies at the base of the argument he's putting forward is actually some corrupted concepts and corrupted way of looking at things, and particularly that surrounds the things which I mentioned before, which is apartheid and genocide, and also the way in which he deploys the use of international. That on the show, I think about a week ago. Actually, even by the provisions of international law, what Israel's doing isn't actually clearly unjustifiable, and yet he says that any settlement then is going to be in the future needs to be in alignment with international law, which is, of course, the favorite way that enemies of Israel like to take a swing at Israel. So I think he's relying on corrupted content, the base of his argument. And this is where the work of Rand is so important, because if people don't, in a sense, have the wherewithal to notice that they're using faulty concepts at the base of their argument, then in a sense, it will do its work. It'll be put over on people. So it was quite frustrating seeing him put his case forward like this on multiple channels, and also because it's not like Brand is an unsympathetic interviewer. Brand was just letting him kind of do his shtick unopposed, and he doesn't have the intellectual chops to combat it as it's coming at him. And of course, Brand's whole point of view, which I guess we'll get into as well, is completely terrible. His whole take on Israel-Palestine is awful as well.
Yeah, Morgan, at some points you were getting a little choppy there, but we got most of it. Yeah, I just want to address Dini, who asks in the chat, says, argue with or block the anti-Semites. I mean, I don't know. I would probably go for neither at this point, although we are paying attention. At some point we will block such people when they're just trolling and helping with the algorithm. We appreciate it. Much like you trolls, it's mostly one troll, I think, but I haven't read all the messages. Yeah, we also hope that more people get to see this content. So thank you for your service, Marco.
Yeah, as Morgan said, most of what he does is actually misusing words or using words in a way which serve his rhetoric effectively. Using words like Gaza is a concentration camp. He knows exactly the concentration camps were places where Jews during the Second World War were gathered and then moved to an extermination camp where they were killed by the millions. 6 million of them were killed by the Nazis, and now he's arguing that that's not true, and all this kind of crap that comes out from his mind. The only problem is that the people, as I said, the people who follow him call him words like a man of truth, a brave man. Well, what's brave about taking the mainstream line, taking the mainstream line of the effectively Muslim population, which is a big chunk of the audience, and then playing to the tune, playing to the audience. What would be brave would be going around with images of Muhammad and saying that actually every religion is false, and you've all been hoodwinked. Go to Gaza and start explaining people that Allah doesn't exist, and you're living in misery in Gaza because your government, Hamas, is actually siphoning off all the billions that come from all over the world in order to build military infrastructure, tunnels, and buy weapons, and enriching its own leaders. That would be brave, and that would be also true.
One of the difficulties when you see people interviewing these anti-Semites is people like Russell Brand, who fall between the lightweight and the sycophant when it comes to it. So how tough is an interviewer's question or is an interviewer when you can persuade them to read sections of your own book instead of asking you tough questions? I mean, that's really going to get you to expose your thinking fully, isn't it? And when it comes to the argument that Israel has lots of technology and is therefore more evil because of its level of technology, because it can use computers and have targeted strikes, that seems to be arguing in favor of primitive butchery, the kind of primitive butchery that we saw on October the 7th. Now, is that really the way you wish to frame your argument? I think the point about him constantly referring to his parents as Holocaust survivors. Now, this brings up an interesting issue for me, because you are your own individual, you have your own free will, your own agency. Whether your parents were lousy or magnificent, it really is irrelevant to your own life. But I do want to make a comparison with Mossab Hassan Youssef, the son of Sheikh Hassan Youssef, the co-founder of Hamas. Now the difference here, and you guys may need to help me to draw this point out, but the difference here for me is the fact that Mossab Hassan Youssef could see firsthand all of the evil that Hamas was performing, both before they became in charge of Gaza and after they became in charge of Gaza, and all of the butchery and the evil of that regime, and therefore chose to help the Israelis to try and defeat it for the benefit of the Palestinians oppressed by Hamas. So being the son of the leader is relevant in that context because he's got first-hand experience. However, in the same geography that we're talking about, in the same time we're talking about. However, if you compare Finkelstein talking about his parents in a different place, in a different time, dropping a lot of context, and in a place where he wasn't personally, where he's got no direct knowledge at all, then he's simply exploiting that fact about his parents for personal gain in terms of credibility or perceived credibility when making his own arguments.
Yeah, I should point out, somebody actually pointed this out in the chat when in previous episodes when we talked about Mossab Hassan Youssef, that he's actually from the West Bank, but Hamas had Hamas is present there. It had a stronger presence in the past, but it is still very much there. It's not like Gaza where it is only pretty much only Hamas. Um, yeah, Russell Brand, I don't know how much we should uh, talk about him. Actually, I will talk about him a bit later when I talk about the hard-hitting questions that he asked when he got to the point of anti-Semitism. That was fascinating to watch. But yeah, we've spoken about Russell Brand on this channel when the allegations of sexual assault came out. I think we did 3 shows in 2 days about him. And of course, I thought at the time, this was my opinion, that the allegations seemed like they were missing something. But of course, his response to that has been pretty much his entire, what he has said in his entire career as a political and cultural commentator, which is it's some sort of a conspiracy of, whoever, whatever complex it is with the government and the strong evil capitalists. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about Russell Brand. It is Norman Finkelstein who is the hero or anti-hero of this show and of that interview. So one of the things was that he said he used this expression that is used by the IDF of mowing the lawn, and of course, he used that expression and then he gave his own definition of it. Now again, he studied this. He knows when he says something that it is not actually the fact. And he said this in the context of, he said, I always try to play devil's advocate so that I fully understand the other side's position or whatever bullshit he was saying. And as part of his playing devil's advocate, he was saying that mowing the lawn is mowing the skulls of children. This was something that he said in there. Now, this is not, I guarantee you, he cannot bring a quote from the IDF. He does this thing that, when you quote somebody and, the first part is a quote, and then the second part is you adding what you think should be added to the first part to make it look the way you want to make it look. So, yeah, that's one of those moments in the interview where I said, it's time to pause and have a sip of water, as I will have now, just thinking about it. Morgan.
Just whilst you were saying that final bit, my connection keeps dropping in and out. So I'm really sorry if there's an issue whilst I'm talking. Something that comes up continuously throughout their conversation, I think, is basically the idea of moral equivalence, and it comes up slightly differently from Brand and from Finkelstein. So Brand, his case is a very typical case of what he wants to see from the war, which is that he just wants to see peace. So he just wants a ceasefire, he just wants peace declared, and so on. When of course, and the way people, I guess, position themselves when they're advocating for that position is that what is that in a sense that there are bad things on both sides. So we just need peace, and then we can negotiate these things together. Except, of course, there is no moral equivalence between the two sides here. One side was the aggressor, and one side is not. And something that Finkelstein makes great hay out of, and which I think the pro-Israeli side could do a better job of, is then saying, "Oh, but there's a history." Now, of course, the fact that there's history doesn't actually support the side that Finkelstein is trying to support. It actually goes the other way. So I think pro-Israeli advocates need to be better at pointing out the history. And the way he makes the point is by saying, well, look, there's a history that justifies this action. In a sense, he's saying it's resistance against an oppressor and so on, and other corrupted concepts that's going on here, of oppression and of colonialism. That all stuff kind of gets brought in. So Brand is making a moral equivalence between Israel and Palestine in this case, or Israel and Hamas, whatever. And for Finkelstein, I'm completely losing my thread of thought now, rather usefully. Finkelstein is making the case that, oh God, bloody hell. I'm completely losing my train of thought. I'll come back to it in a second.
All right, I'll give you a few seconds to recover, and I will just say that one of the disturbing things I see in the chat is Douglas saying my super chat is not going through. I don't know if this is the powers that Russell Brand is talking about, trying to prevent us from keeping the lights on here. But yeah, hopefully that'll be sorted out because we are funded by our supporters on the channel and our members. So yeah, hopefully that does fix itself. And thank you for trying, and thank you to the super chatters who are super chatting. I'm also losing my yeah, I had a something I could add here, but Morgan, did you
So I didn't remember the point exactly as I was going to make it, but I was basically going to come around to pointing people towards Ayn Rand's essay, The Cult of Moral Grayness, because that's something that comes up a lot in, or the kind of issue she's addressing in that essay is something that comes up a lot in these kind of discussions, and is something which I think you can see going on in their discussion. So it's the kind of idea that there are no absolute moral sides. There's only gray. So it goes to the idea that, there is no black and white. There's only shades of gray. Rand, of course, points out in that essay that the only way you can get gray is by first understanding that there is a black and there's a white. So she kind of deconstructs and makes fun of that whole notion. But they make use of that kind of idea to kind of undermine the moral case for Israel. And I think people need to be aware of that going in, that there is a victim in this conflict, which is Israel. It's the victim of the aggression from Hamas. It's the victim from Gaza, really, of aggression from Gaza. And that's what gives Israel justification in what it's doing. That's part of the reason why this isn't a genocide. There's other facts that go on that point to why this isn't a genocide, as Finkelstein makes the case. And I think if people go and read that essay with these kind of conversations around the conflict.
I have to say, whenever you cut out, we see your lips moving, but we can't hear it, and it very much sounds like censorship. But no, just to make clear, these are jokes. I don't think anybody is actually censoring us. If they wanted to, this would not be the method. All right, I'll keep what I have to say about ceasefire for a minute. Marco.
Yeah, just to remind people, if you're censored by the power that be, you can always leave a super tank later.
Now Marco is gone.
Yeah, Marco and Richard are now cut off, so hopefully they will be back soon, and I will say what I had to say about ceasefire. And again, we say this all the time, but we can't say it often enough. Every show we do about Israel, we should probably repeat this. The people who are saying ceasefire now are saying Hamas has done their attacks on October 7th, and we need a ceasefire now to prevent Israel from preventing Hamas from doing that again. There is no way around it. And the fact that Norman Finkelstein, who initially on October 7th celebrated the attack before he kind of backtracked, the fact that he is making the ceasefire now argument, and everybody from him to Hamas themselves who are demanding a ceasefire, that should tell you all you need to know. Hamas is on the one hand demanding a ceasefire. On the other hand, they have said we will do October 7th style attacks again and again and again until Israel is annihilated. So if you are calling for a ceasefire, you are calling for the extermination of the Jews, and there is no way around that. And we here will keep calling you out on that if that is your position. Morgan.
Yeah. I guess just to reiterate, I guess the point about moral equivalence is there's a point that Rand makes, which is very, very good, which is that when there's an attempt at moral equivalence to be made between something evil and something that's good, so in this case between Gaza and Hamas and Israel, it is the good side that loses out, because in a sense it's the bad side which is being elevated up, and it's the good side which is being torn down to that level. So when people like Finkelstein or whoever are making the case, are trying to in a sense draw an equivalence between the two sides, or claim, or say things like they're just as bad as each other, when of course in a sense actually Finkelstein's saying that Israel's almost even worse. It's Israel who loses out. So the people who say, oh, we just want peace, both sides are just as bad as each other, both sides have done bad things, it's Israel who loses out in that comparison, because Israel is the side with justice on its side. It's not Gaza. So you need to be really wary when people are saying these things, because they'll clothe themselves in the language of we're really reasonable, we just want peace, we just want to talk, we just want negotiations, even though that since there's violence going on, all conversation has to stop until the violence is stopped, and it can only be stopped by the people who initiated it. So it's Israel who loses out, and the people who just say they want conversation, they just want peace, that can only happen once Hamas has been defeated. That can't happen any sooner. And Finkelstein really knows that. He's not an unintelligent person. He was a professor. You can go read his whole books on this subject at length. So he does ultimately know what he's talking about, and he does know better.
Yeah, by the way, I think there, yeah, I missed some of it. There was a lot of activity in the chat. I think there was actually more than one pro-Hamas troll, but hey, people who want to engage with that can. I think the content here is good and is the kind of content that hopefully people who actually maybe for whatever reason listen to Russell Brand and Norman Finkelstein on things in general will actually listen to this and rethink their position. Some people I think are too far gone, but some people are not. And yeah, hopefully they will be convinced. We are joined once again by Marco and Richard. Marco, you were cut off, I think, early in what you were saying. So if you want to repeat that.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I was saying that if you want to beat the evil people behind us trying to trying to censor us before I was kicked out, you can always leave a super chat, a super thank at the end of it, just to get around the issue. And then my point was that when Finkelstein uses those testimonies from military people just to make his own point. I mean, we all know that the military tend to be hard as nails. They're not very good with prose, so that they do tend to use terminology that to us civilians sound quite harsh and heartless. But that's the kind of language that he exploits in order to prove that all these guys going against the evil monster in Gaza are actually evil because they use techniques and words that sound very, very bad. The other thing I wanted to mention that when it goes back to the moral equivalence that Morgan was talking about. When people make the point that Israel behaves like the Nazis or shouldn't behave the way it's behaving, i.e. forcefully against the aggressors in Gaza, you're effectively arguing that we should just, the civilized high-tech power should give in to the low-tech butchers who go around murdering people just because being high-tech is a sin. If you're an advanced civilization, you are as morally comparable as the civilization who gives us theocracies, hanging, people burning in cages, children beheading. And that's the kind of stuff we really have to refute. We have to make the point that Western civilization, and Israel is among them, is actually morally superior to any of these savage cultures. There is such a thing as a bad culture, and every culture which moves away from granting individual rights, granting freedom to people, granting the pursuit of their own happiness, all these cultures are morally reprehensible and should be wiped out. Any time there is a chance to wipe one of these things out, we should do it.
And to add to that point, there's also the other technique which is used, which is taking a bad individual from a good culture and using them to condemn the entire culture itself. And that is a sleight of hand which he is very prone to do. I think the Ayn Rand article that Morgan refers to there, The Cult of Moral Greyness, includes lots of excellent points that relate to how people are covering this whole thing, including using complexity, the fact that it's a complex issue, as a means to discourage people from exploring it and to accept the everybody's to blame at some level greyness outcome without understanding the morality that underpins the position of Israel and the argument of self-defense. She also makes points in there about there being two sides to every argument and how you have to analyze that and judge that relevantly. So I would certainly urge everybody to read that particular article. What Finkelstein tends to do, particularly when he's taking the devil's advocate position, which he announces in advance, is what he means by devil's advocate is straw manning. Quite simply, that's his classic technique there of making a paper argument out of what the opposition are saying and then destroying it himself when that isn't the argument, or at least it doesn't include sufficient detail to present the side of Israel that's necessary. I think one of the things that is interesting when you look at Finkelstein is the other people that he's been associated with in the past. I mean, he certainly defended David Irving, for example, the notorious Holocaust denier and alleged historian. I'm sure I got the alleged in the right place there. And also he was for many years, his mentor was Noam Chomsky, who's I'm not sure whether he's fallen out with Noam Chomsky. There's nothing more dull than academics infighting, but certainly he was. Noam Chomsky was his mentor for a good number of years, and Noam Chomsky's position on Israel and Palestine down the years has been particularly bad in its own right. I looked at he's. Noam Chomsky has pointed out that Hamas's charter, which we've covered on this channel, and how it calls for the destruction of Israel, Chomsky called it empty and meaningless. He said that Israeli propagandists overstate the savagery, the group's violent capacity of Hamas, and we saw on October 7th how nobody has overstated that, and he's also called what Israel is doing worse than apartheid in Gaza, because when, as we've analysed again on this channel, and as Harry Binswang has unpicked very clearly, there's nothing further from the truth than that accusation.
Thank you, Ashley Shrugged, for the super chat. Ashley says, Finkelstein sawed off, and then adds, Yank tries English insult. Well, I will leave the judgment of that English insult to the English people. I actually have my own struggle with some stuff that Russell Brand said that we're going to get to in a moment. Yeah, Chomsky probably deserves his own episode, but I think we need to keep these at least a few weeks apart because, it feels like a sacrifice, which is not what I want to engage in when I have to study these people. But one thing I remember from Chomsky is when America was responding to 9/11, called it the war on terror. He said, if America wants to fight a war on terror, they should attack Israel. And of course, he also excused the massacre of millions of Cambodians by the Khmer Rouge. So yeah, he's a figure who belongs to be mentioned in the same sentence as Finkelstein. So Finkelstein, another thing he said before we get to the anti-Semitism question is that this is a declared genocide. Now, I don't understand what the word declared means there, unless it means declared by Norman Finkelstein. This is something that again, they try to up the rhetoric, but they don't need to connect it to reality, because people who want things connected to reality aren't going to be Norman Finkelstein fans in the first place, and will only listen to a Norman Finkelstein as a way to see what the other side is saying, and hopefully quickly be disillusioned with them. Thank you, Watching, for the super chat. Watching says, victimhood does not equal virtue and nobility. That is true. Any additional comments before we go to the anti-Semitism question that Russell Brand asked? Very long-winded question.
I think one point I wanted to make is not only does he condemn Israel, Finkelstein, but he's also unwilling to condemn the terrorist groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah on the other side. He said of Hezbollah in particular, he said, if Hezbollah is to be considered a terrorist organization, and you can stop the sentence there, for God's sake, if it turns your stomach to hear that. But he goes on to say that Israel is therefore 25 times worse, or 25 times of a greater terrorist organization. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the essence of his point there. So he's definitely laying out his full disconnect, his full misrepresentation on both sides here, presenting evil on the wrong side in terms of Israel, and then excusing it on the other side, as if terrorism justifies terrorism. It seems to be the core of his argument there.
And I think the point you made about never taking reality in consideration is like Chomsky, for example. How can you argue that Israel is a terrorist, generates terrorism, when how many Orthodox Jews have you ever seen blowing up children at concerts? I mean, how can you deny reality to this extent? And take Finkelstein as well. He's probably worked out by this point that if as I said earlier, if you follow the mainstream haters, which are high numbers, well, it's probably a good thing for your career. Well, once you set yourself up, well, doesn't matter which side of the road, according to these guys, as long as you have a big audience, well, then you can make a career out of it. So who cares about reality?
The only thing I think the point he's making about it being a declared genocide, I can't remember the exact quote, but he's referring to a quote that was made by someone in the IDF or an Israeli politician early on. I can't remember the content of it exactly, but this is something that he brings up in multiple interviews as proof that Israel is sort of openly saying that it's going there to commit genocide. Now, whatever you think of that quote, it'd be better if I had it to hand. Unfortunately, I didn't think we were going to talk about it. There's something about the way that people like this operate, which is that, of course, there is a quote which we all know, which came from the Hamas side, which was that they're going to do October the 7th again and again and again. And does that come up in his mind at all? No, it doesn't. Despite the fact that if Norman Finkelstein were in one of these kibbutz near the border on October 7th, he would have been grabbed and killed just like anyone else. He would not exist in Gaza before October 7th, or in any Gaza that if it were to stay under the control of Hamas, that may exist in the future. So the way in which they would selectively choose these things goes to the lack of objectivity. And there was something else I was going to say, but it slipped my mind again. I'm clearly not on form today, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, David, for the super chat. Les says in the chat, Norm was a big Mao supporter. Mao actually committed genocide against his own people. Now, I have to say, one thing that made it easier for me, to prepare for this episode as opposed to the previous one was that we did on Finkelstein was previous one was a general one about Finkelstein, and I just thought I should consume his stuff, whereas this is just the one. It is with Russell Brand being Russell Brand, which kind of makes it a little bit easier. Yeah, the Ayn Rand Center UK doesn't pay me enough to go and watch everything that Finkelstein does, let alone read his books. So that will probably not be covered unless you have it in a 5-minute clip that we can talk about. All right, should we go to, yeah, we should go to the anti-Semitism question. I will just point out, as I also point out frequently, which is somebody goes through, I've been anti-war since I was young. I was against the Vietnam War and I was against all the other wars. And of course, whatever your view of these wars, some of them, I think the Vietnam War, for example, was difficult to justify, but the one thing that's consistent about him is, again, he's not anti-war. He's anti the West ever winning a war. He always takes the side of dictators. The Vietnam War, the other side were communists who ended up taking the country. Let's not forget that. So a war can be wrong in the sense that a country shouldn't send their soldiers to fight it, but the enemy there was still evil. All right, the anti-Semitism question. So Russell Brand, this is when he plays, devil's advocate in a sense, and he brings up the point of anti-Semitism and is part of an anti-Semitism. Now he keeps adding this word, it's grafted onto it, or something like that. He keeps basically in the way he frames the question over several minutes, he calls bullshit on the idea that the anti-Semitism is in any way involved. And Finkelstein's answer actually surprised me because, and I shouldn't be surprised at this point by this guy, but it was like he was saying, look, what do you expect? It was saying basically being anti-Semitic is the right thing to do in a sense, because this is the Jewish state and they're calling themselves a Jewish state. So if you're fighting against them, you're fighting against the Jews. And yeah, this was, even for Finkelstein, this surprised me. Now, of course, then he did what these people love to do, and Russell Brand doubled down on it, which is to list the token Jews that are on the front lines, the Norman Finkelsteins of the anti-Israel movement. It's, the Orthodox Jews who are anti-Israel because they believe that an existence of a Jewish state before the Messiah comes is some sort of a violation of the Bible. There's all these lovely people that the anti-Israel the anti-Israel crowd is happy to embrace. The one thing I think, if these people were to ultimately win, Finkelstein would probably be the last one they get rid of, but I just imagine him. I will be earlier in that. I won't be here to see that, but I think of that video that we talk about sometimes here of during the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020 of these people in their apartments shouting at the people marching in the street, chanting in their favor, and then they throw a rock and they break one of their windows, and the guy starts shouting, "We're on your side, we're on your side," and then they throw another rock and break the other window. And I'm thinking of Norman Finkelstein in his last moments, if the pro-terrorism side wins, saying, "Look, I was on your side. I fought with you this whole time," and they'll say, "Yeah, but you're a Jew. What do you expect?" Marco.
The Finkelstein has got this weird thing they keep saying. It's about his parents. Yeah, my parents would hate the German for the rest of their life for what they did to them. And therefore extrapolates this concept of they had the right to hate because the Germans made my parents' life bad. And then he extends this stupid concept to Gaza. So Israeli making the Gaza's life bad because they fight back instead of let the Islamists destroy Israel. They have the courage to fight back. So Gazas are in a way justified to hate the Jews, and he uses this idiotic set of thinking to justify anti-Semitism effectively. Everybody who confronts you in the street, you have the right to hate them because they make your life worse. If you apply this concept of hate to everybody you don't like, well, you can start pack up and go home because this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And the way he uses all this kind of rationalization and made up stories and chosen, as you said, he chooses somebody that thinks the way he thinks. Therefore, the somebody is the proof that his thinking is correct. It's all this kind of weird thing, and that's, again, I'm surprised that people don't see through this kind of so-called thinking behind this made up intellectuals are really the lowest of the low.
And what Russell Brand is doing every time he's talking about grafted anti-Semitism is he's giving the interviewee the instant get out clause in the question itself. So he's really letting the interviewee off the hook, and he's not even putting forward a question which he would appear to believe in. And Finkelstein listing all the token Jews when he's one who are against Israel, when he's also one of them, is just saying, you should listen to me again. It's the same old point. You should listen to me because my parents were Holocaust survivors, because I'm a Jew. It's like it's a circular argument all the time that is utterly meaningless. And the only occasions when he has come out and not followed the Arab or Palestinian line when it comes to Israel, and he's spoken out a little bit against BDS as a movement, but then bemoaned the fact that he suddenly got a lot of his speaking engagements in the Middle East cancelled because he wasn't on the side of the BDS movement for cancelling the use of people buying Israeli products. But I think we cannot cover Dr. Finkelstein. It would be remiss of us to cover him without quoting a little bit of his tweet from just after October the 7th, would it? And that last line, where he says, It warms every fibre of my soul, the scenes of Gaza's smiling children as their arrogant Jewish supremacist oppressors have finally been humbled. That is your response to October 7th, to people raping other people to death. You consider that being humbled. It's despicable.
Yeah, he later backtracked on it, but when he backtracked, he said, at the time I wrote this, I thought there were only 50 people dead. So, yeah, that's a very, very good excuse. There was something you mentioned there that I also wanted to reply to, but I don't remember. Morgan.
Yeah, it shouldn't exactly matter whether it's 50 or however many people. I think his response to the question about anti-Semitism, basically amounts to saying the quiet part out loud. It was the bit that he should have thought in his head and not really said, because it kind of gives the game away. There's a fascinating chapter in Dave Rich's book, which I'm reading at the moment, which is about kind of this phenomena of kind of, I guess, self-loathing Jews who end up supporting the pro-Palestinian side, no matter how much it isn't actually in their self-interest. And I'm going to try and see if we can get Dave Rich on the channel and interview him maybe, but it's kind of this idea of there's a kind of internalization of kind of guilt around it because they want to be lefty, and so they're kind of tribal, so they kind of internalize the hatred of Israel that you get from the left. And I'm presuming that that's kind of where this is coming from. But of course, his answer just amounts to saying that you've brought it on yourself. And except the whole notion of bringing it on yourself, it goes against the idea of justice. The victim of aggression does not bring it on themselves. It's fundamentally unjust to think like that. And that should be what disqualifies him in people's minds straight away, I think. And the fact that Russell Brand wasn't shocked by that just goes to say a lot about who Russell Brand is. And the fact that Finkelstein then can be invited onto mainstream news sources to debate with people like Alan Dershowitz, who is not exactly a great exponent of the pro-Israeli side, says a lot about our culture as well, that we don't hear that kind of thing. And that's not like a scandal in the headlines that he said that. Whereas on other subjects, if you said similar things, it would be. So I think we really have to have a deep think about why get a pass with this. What is it that motivates us to not notice just how bad that is?
Thank you, Kirk Wilcox, for the super chat. Kirk is a regular on this show. I believe he's on tomorrow, but Morgan can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Oh, did you say you're muted? I don't know if you said I don't know or if you said.
I don't believe.
Oh, all right. Well, then he will be sometime soon. And he says, I call him Butter Fingerstein because he has a habit of dropping context. Yeah, what I wanted to say, I think we have some ANCAPs in the chat, by the way. This is we've said in the past what the problem with libertarians is they have no philosophical basis for their views and they end up supporting savages. That's not a surprise. Yeah, the point about Jews being front and center in I think it was Brand who said, Jews, something like Jews are front and center. Yeah, because you put them front and center, because you're waving them around saying, look, we have some Jews. But yeah, that doesn't make this movement not anti-Semitic. It reminds me, I don't know if I should say again, Morgan, you might be too young to remember this. Marco and Richard, you're not too young to remember this, when the BNP was forced by the courts to accept non-white people. The British National Party was forced. They only had white people. That was their policy. Then they were forced. Then it was on day one, some black person signed up. And then they were like, look, we have a black person. This is, yeah, that's the same with Jews in the anti-Israel movement. So when he was done praising the token Jews, Finkelstein went over to talk about the Jews he has a problem with. Thank you, Kathleen, for the super chat. He mentioned Margaret Hodge. Margaret Hodge is a leftist from Labour. She's my former local MP. And she had trouble in Labour under Jeremy Corbyn because she is of Jewish descent. She is not a great supporter of Israel. She is not right on almost anything politically. She's just not as despicable. She's not at the right level of despicability to get the praise of Norman Finkelstein. And again, as a Jew, what that means for her is yeah, she is in trouble with him. Any final comments before we sign off?
Razi, earlier on in the TDO, you were talking about how Israel is losing the war. I see a bit more, a bit wider than this. It's not just Israel is losing the war; it's the all civilized Western ideas they are losing against these, as I said, low-tech medieval savages who just want to impose a theocracy on the rest of the world. You just see the comments that people make after under Finkelstein's total mental meltdowns. People call him a man of justice. There's nothing more unjust than what he's doing and what the people who don't challenge him are doing. They're accepting his premising, they're accepting moral equivalence, as Morgan said earlier on, and they refuse to take just the fact and evaluate his behavior and what he say for what it is, because they are too afraid to take a position. And that's exactly what we're not doing here. We totally condemn this guy and everyone who supports him. And I think we could have been more clear than we've been, I think.
And maybe I just mention the point about moral sanction as well. The mainstream news all the time to talk about this because he's viewed as some kind of authority rather than someone whose book about this, the Holocaust industry, was panned when it came out by reputable sources for being kind of based on bad facts, bad faith interpretations, and so on. And through this, he gets invited onto like to debate with Alan Dershowitz, and the whole premise of that debate, which they had, which I guess we haven't really spoken about, but was that they were going to have a civil conversation about this, and no one was going to get annoyed at the other, and they were going to speak very calmly and moderatedly, except the fact that the case that Finkelstein is putting across is completely corrupt, and it needs to be pointed out as being that. And if you just have this civil conversation where you're not going to point that out, you're not going to say like you're an awful person, and here's why, here's like all this stuff you're saying is rubbish. And instead, if you just sit back very prim and proper and just say your piece and then shush, then you give sanction to his case. You can make it more credible by engaging with it. And Alan Dershowitz, despite all the great praising of his intellect that goes around, did a terrible job in that debate, and actually ends up giving a lot of credence to the side that Finkelstein is putting across. And Piers Morgan ends up basically agreeing with Finkelstein as well. So you just need to be careful about some of these figures, and you end up helping them by giving them the dignity of engaging with them sometimes. So you just need to be careful about that.
Quick question: would you take him on in a debate?
Finkelstein. Basically, no, for the reasons I said. I might write something about how terrible he is, but I think he basically goes beyond the pale. There are people out there who I think are genuinely confused on these issues. I think it's perfectly fine to engage with them and to talk with them, but I think he's bad at such a deep level that he basically knows better. Like there's no convincing of him that I could actually do. And when I was younger, I used to engage with people basically no matter what, and you end up just banging your head against the wall because they're actually having the conversation in bad faith. You're not actually, if I were just to lay out to Finkelstein everything that's wrong with what he said, why it's not appropriate to say that Israel's engaging in apartheid or genocide and so on, it wouldn't change his mind one jot. So there's not only a kind of utilitarian point about I'm not going to convince him for 1 second, that I'm also going to end up dignifying him more by trying to engage with him, I think.
Speaking of engaging with bad people, I do see we have a lot of people who dislike Jews in the chat. We have a lot of ANCAPs. To the ANCAPs, I really say get a life, or at the very least get a boat, sail it into the high seas, declare it a country, take your anti-Semitic friends with it and with you, and I'm sure everybody will it'll be the envy of the world. Tomorrow we're going to talk about a much better organized piece of the Palestinian propaganda puzzle. I love alliteration. I didn't even think about that. It came to me naturally. Which is Al Jazeera. So tomorrow on the Daily Objective, 5:30 p.m. UK time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to talk about Al Jazeera. Make sure you tune in for that. The reality show will be back at 6 p.m. UK time, right after the Daily Objective. Yeah, we have some very good shows coming up. Thank you, Garbled Words, for the super chat, who says it's not about convincing Finkelstein, it's about the audience. I agree. But there is the question of who you are actually sharing an audience, a stage with, and to what extent you're actually endorsing them as somebody who might be honestly mistaken. And yeah, I agree with Morgan. Finkelstein is way beyond the pale. I would not share a panel with somebody like that, or a stage. But I am honored to share the stage with you guys. Let me just quickly say, Marco and Richard, people can find your work on the Briefly Objective. That is our other channel. A lot of great content and bite-sized. If you want to share our content with people who can't handle an hour-long show, and even if they can handle, that's a great channel. Make sure you're subscribed to that and watch what's on it. Morgan, your Substack, I don't remember it off the top of my head.
It'll be linked in the description. There's an article I've been wrestling for about a week, that's going up in the morning. It was meant to have gone up a week ago, but it'll be going up in the morning. It's called The Ruins of Civilization and Cultural Change. Everyone should go and give that a read.
I am at Razi Ginsburg on X. Marco, you had something else to promote.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the stupid Jew haters that are in the chat right now to continue conversation later on underneath here on the comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the engagement. Also share it with your anti-Semitic friends. And yeah, thanks everyone. ARC UK members, the Fountainhead Book Club starts now, a couple of minutes late. Sorry about that. And yeah, we will see you back here tomorrow. Thanks.